Hello, and welcome back to the Banking Revolution. I'm Liz Lumley of The Banker. This afternoon, we're looking at putting people before product. Is customer experience the new heart of banking? So, customers are now expecting much more from their banks and financial services firms. They're looking for everything at their fingertips and on demand. How is the industry responding to this, and what does a true customer-centric bank really look like? So we have a wonderful panel here for you today. I'm going to bring them on so that they can introduce themselves to you. So can we start with Cohen, please?
Hello, Liz. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. At Time, we designed and operate digital banks focused on underserved consumers and underserved small businesses in emerging markets. Our flagship project is Time Bank in South Africa. We're now in our third year of operation. We've got about 4 million customers on the platform, and happy to share with you that we've got the best net promoter score in the country in the last 2 quarters. And right now, we're also in the process of building a bank in the Philippines, which hopefully will switch on second quarter next year.
Excellent, thank you. So can we have Leslie Ann, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am Leslie Ann Vaughan. I work at the Modulit Foundation. We're an open source foundation focused on inclusive, interoperable payments switching technology. And my claim to fame over the years is I was part of the original M-Pesa team that launched M-Pesa probably 2 years before anyone knew about it in 2005 in Kenya, with a small pilot group. And we launched what we all know and love as M-Pesa in 2007. So a lot of my stories come from that background.
Excellent, thank you. So can we have Sujana, please, as well? Introduce yourself.
Thanks, Liz. I'm Sujata Bhatia. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Manzo Bank. We're a UK digital regulated bank with just over 5 million customers in the UK. We've been around for about 6 years. Have some similar net promoter score, wonderful stories as Cohen does. And so it's exciting to see that taking place around the world. And our mission and purpose is to make money work for everyone. We have a fledgling operation in the US and look forward to talking with all of you today.
Excellent. So rounding up our panel, we have Diego. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Diego Marquinez, the CEO of Movistar Money. We are a fintech operating in South America. We are creating products and services based on technology and data. Everything is at the core. And I've been working previously on traditional banks, so my journey is quite interesting.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we're going to start in with our discussion, but before I start in with my questions, let me say we are taking audience questions. So please put them in the chat, and if they're interesting and provocative, we'll see if we can bring them on air. Can't guarantee all of them, but we'll see them and see if we can bring in some of your audience questions during our discussion. So as we start off, I mean, the title of this panel is customer experience the new heart of banking? And I'm really kind of focusing on that word new. And I've heard this before, customers are now, banks are now concerned with customer service and putting the customer first. And I always think, what were they doing before? this newfound interest in customers. So I wanted to start off our discussion kind of looking at that high level question. So I'll start with Sujana, please. Why has the industry discovered the customer just now? What do you think?
I think customer experience has become the heart of all businesses now, and not just the banking sector. And I think banking can't be immune from that in this day and age. Certainly when I joined Manzo, customer experience is at the heart of everything we do, and it's what attracted me to the company. I spent 16 years at American Express before that. It was a pretty customer-centric place, but here it's clearly in the DNA. And it was that kind of founding purpose and mission to make money work for everyone. You could see it even in the early days. The founders were co-creating products with customers, literally in the offices in Shoreditch, side by side, understanding what their needs were and launching in a really iterative way propositions that would meet those needs. And I think that was a real shakeup to the industry. I don't think customers even realize that they could expect this from their banks, that it could not just be a utility or a hole in the wall to take money out of. And I think that's raised the bar for everyone, not just Manzo, but all of these wonderful people on the panel, that that level of disruption has raised the bar. And a lot of companies are now scrambling to figure out how to infuse that in their own culture and DNA. And you see that validation, and I think that that holds other players accountable. I mean, for Manzo, we won like the best bank first service for the third time at CMA in the UK, and our net promoter score is 70, which is like 3x most of the incumbents. And that's not just due to like excellent customer service, although that's incredibly important. It's about having products that people really love to use and features that delight them. And so, it's about being obsessed about solving their pain points, creating greater control, visibility. And I think all of those things combined are really what has put the pressure on and intensified that kind of war for the customers' hearts and minds.
Yeah, no, very much so. I think there aren't many of us in the UK are used to seeing the sort of the hot coral pink card out as a that sort of identification that you hadn't seen before, people with their bank. So Cohen, I wanted to go to you. What is it about this new interest in the customer?
Liz, I've heard consultants and executives in banks bang the customer-centric drum for 20 years now. And I think for most of the 20 years, customers certainly didn't notice that was a priority anyway. I think part of the challenge in the industry is that it is a brutally complex and a very heavily regulated industry, which means that once the CEO walks away from his speech about customer centricity, what he finds in his inbox and his calendar mostly has nothing to do with the customer. And the people who find their way up into the top ranks of big organizations are mostly people who have had nothing to do with customers. And these are the smart guys who run treasuries and capital adequacy and compliance and risk and credit risk and all these other things. And I think what's changed, and I think, Sujata, you put your finger on the pulse here. What's changed is customer expectations, the possibilities of what we can do, and most importantly, the competitive landscape. And suddenly, I think people will just have to make time in their diaries and on their to-do list to get this thing right.
Interesting. No, I'm very interested also to move on to Leslie Ann, especially since your experience with M-Pesa, a service that didn't come out of the traditional banking environment and was very much focused around meeting specific customer needs. So I would love to know your view on this customer-centric focus we're experiencing right now.
So exactly that. We didn't come out of a bank. We came out of a telco, which is also a massive enterprise, but we were a small team of 5 who were given this dedicated mission to actually spend corporate social responsibility budget on innovation around microfinance originally. And so it very much was a banking endeavor, and it's about efficiency. How can we put digital into the story and create some efficiency in that story? But none of us were microfinance experts. So we learned by the kind of HCD methods that we see today. We went to group meetings, we learned how it worked, we studied how the MFIs worked behind the scenes, and we tried to fully model Grameen into our software and discovered it was far too complex for ladies who were getting their first phone handed to them by us as part of the pilot. We were teaching them how to use Nokias, and we were teaching them the basics of phones, never mind Grameen on phones. And so what we discovered as part of what did stick in those 2 years of pilot, that actually there was a real pain point we were serving. And it has digital, but it wasn't low touch. Our agent network was central to what we were doing. What we now see in the industry as branchless banking models was central to providing that human touch point alongside the digital services. And it was all about efficiency of cash as much as it was about moving money efficiently. And giving people that place to kind of interact with the service was foundational. And actually in the research that came out, that turned out to be one of the indicators of financial inclusion, was how far people had to travel to their local shops to do the cash out kind of facilities. So customer centricity comes with a huge dose of empathy. And I think that's what we brought alongside our technology skills and our studying through field work of what was going on. Fundamentally, customers were not at banks. They were scared of banks. They were distrustful of banks, but they trusted the telco services because they already enjoyed services from the telco, and they already knew how to find where to buy airtime, where to do these things. And I think fundamentally that was a big part of the story. The brand trust was a different place. And so the customer centricity was also in the DNA, if you like, almost of Safaricom at the time as well, and a big part of the conversation about why we were different. And we certainly were at that point focused on how do we build a product that we can sell. We actually innovated on the business model massively. The customer was offered monthly service fees from banks and lengthy application processes and all these kind of things. We focused on if you don't use it, you don't pay. And how can we get you out of the store working with your first transaction money in the account before you leave? That's a kind of a 10-minute process. And those foundational pillars were central to the transformation in Kenya that actually made all the banks sit up and take a lot of notice.
Interesting. Yeah. No. I mean, I think the whole M-Pesa story is fascinating, and I think some of us forget the power of the Nokia phone. Way before anyone ever heard of an iPhone, and how much that was
None of
used.
us had Nokias when we started this project, but none of us had smartphones. They didn't exist, but we
No.
were doing digital.
No, it's interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about technology in further questions, but I wanted to move on to Diego here to get your viewpoint on this so-called new focus on the customer.
Yeah, I think there are many elements to understand this change. Okay, for example, one is I think we are moving from a product-centric approach to a customer-centric approach. Okay, so you think about how banks define and produce products and services before. I think they were focused more about profitability and delivering, but not about experience or how to understand or fulfill real customer needs. Huh? And another one is definitely the customer is changing. Okay, so nobody can believe that someone else or someone in the past go to a branch and stream how they are picking up the credit card, and now clients are streaming how they are receiving the card with some neobanks, and so they are becoming ambassadors for the brands. So that's a massive change. And I think that's another thing that we can understand about this change. That is probably traditional. We are always very limited about technology and data. Okay, legacy systems is always a problem. It's a massive problem. I think we will discuss about technology later today, and data is another one. Data wasn't available for the entire company, for all the teams, for all the people within the organization, and this is a real issue. It's a real issue. Okay, because if you don't have access to the data, you can fully understand your customer. That's it. Okay. I
Mm.
think back to the point is I think banks, they thought that they know the customer, but I'm convinced they didn't. Okay, they didn't at the end. So if you combine all these elements, I think you can understand how this is changing the financial industry in the world.
You see, I mean, that kind of leads me to our next question, and it relates to there's a question from the audience about how important has technology become to deliver on improving customer experiences. Now, almost everyone on the panel talked about that human element. I mean, having customer service as part of the DNA, sitting down as ambassadors, sitting down and teaching people how to use a phone and how to use the services. But Diego, you made a point in your last answer about we now have so much data and information on customers. So, I mean, are some of the changes we're seeing taking what? How is the technology we're dealing with today really impacting and changing this focus towards customer service? So, I'm going to start with Sujana, then for that to get a comment on that.
Look, I think technology is like an enabler, but it's not the core of the change. So I agree that having the technology we have today and having the data we have today is really helpful in terms of meeting customer needs. And you talked about human touch, Liz, but obviously sometimes customers don't want to speak to a human. They just want to have zero defect products that delight them and have self-serve in the areas that they don't really want to interact in. And so a human when it's important, and and nothing when you don't need it, right? And so, and seamless products and services that just meet their needs. I really liked what Leslie Ann said about describing her journey with M-Pesa, where technology was fairly rudimentary, but really crystallizing what the customer needs were and obsessing about the customer needs and those pain points delivered transformation. And I think that's true for what all of us are doing. I think customers' eyes have been opened. We are truly, obviously, in the midst of what I think is the next industrial revolution. So propositions in every industry are, opening customers' eyes and helping them understand what life could look like and how their needs could be met. And so I think we're just in the middle of a perfect storm of disruption in customer propositions, improvements in underlying technology and data, and then, of course, in banking, a regulatory landscape that's changed a bit. So really enabling new entrants to come to play, and increasing that disruption and raising the bar, as I said earlier.
So, I mean, moving on to Diego and what you were talking about earlier, I mean, despite this, I mean, since you mentioned we have access to so much more data on how customers behave, how they truly behave, like how much of these advanced technologies really impacting what we're going through right now? What do you think?
Well, I think it's impacting definitely. Okay, but I couldn't agree more with Sujana, because I think it's technology. Sometimes we use technology as an excuse to not deliver a right experience or the right products to our customers. So I think definitely technology is a mean, is not the goal, but it's something that we need to define. We need to evolve. We need to execute, but definitely align with use cases. Okay, and this is something I've seen in some projects or in some companies where they try to create massive data projects with a huge investment, and they fail. Okay, because they fail because the project is not aligned with the real use cases, with real customer needs, to deliver value to them. Okay, so I think go back to culture as well, and resources, and teams. So if we understand that people need to use this technology to deliver their products or their services, and they know that technology is a lever for them to deliver these products and services, probably we will achieve this goal. But if not, probably we will create massive projects. We will frustrate people within the company, and we will not get results at all.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring let the Leslie Ann in on the discussion about, you know, I hate taking the human out of it, but really that discussion of what that technology meant in changing customer behavior and meeting their needs. How big an impact is the technology in meeting customer service?
So, listening to Sujata and Diego, I think one of my passion in this space is that we need more technology than just the technology for the customer. We've got a whole distribution network that need technology to do a good job for our customers. We have customer care staff who need access to real-time data to help customers when they phone because they've literally sent money to the wrong person, and they're in a panic because that's actually their whole wages for the day, all those kind of things, right? So my passion over the years with Invest has been about technology, digital, all the way down. How do we do consumer protection well? How do we realize that to be inclusive, we've also got to do the right thing through regulation? So how do we read the FATF regulations again and create an inclusive solution? Technology can help us do that. We invented the concept of tiered KYC back in 2007 because we had AML officers that were based in the UK, and so we had to adhere to the local regulations in the UK. And as a consequence, we were able to give people services that allow them to spend money up to £1,000 a year, with only the most basic KYC information, which is all they had. That was groundbreaking stuff, and it was done through fairly basic technology, but it had to be designed into those layers below the surface, because the surface needs to be as simple as possible and as friction-free as possible. But you've got to create that service design as you go. And so I think technology had a massive role to play beyond the pure customer experience in making sure that money moves securely, that money moved compliantly, and that at all times we knew where the money was, and customers were served with real time and strong customer service, that people knew what they were doing. I've gone back into banks over the years and done a lot of consultancy. And what I find is a lot of banks have T+1 data at customer care. And for me, like real time is the only thing you can have. and so that's the way I approach this technology conversation. Is it's all about serving customers. It's about getting your business done.
It's like that iceberg of technology with any financial services firm. The front facing is just the tip above the water. So Cohen, I've seen you nodding vigorously at many of our panelists on this topic. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Leslie Ann's point about it not being about just the customer-facing technology, but about all the technologies coming together, that really resonates with me. If we talk about being in the midst of a new industrial revolution, at some level, it's really about infrastructure. It's about a fundamental change of the infrastructure that enables us to engage with customers in a completely different way. And I was explaining to a board earlier this week to some very experienced bankers that 10 years ago, everyone was scared of having multiple systems because, the big challenge was, how do systems speak to each other? That is no longer the problem. Systems are actually now becoming really good at speaking at each other. And that infrastructure layer that this enables us to bring to our customers in itself is a revolution. And maybe there's one thing that I would emphasize in this context of sort of, let's call it new infrastructure and multiple technologies that enable us in different ways, is that I think we're going to see the rise of the specialist financial services firm as a much bigger theme in the landscape. If I take as an example a country like South Africa, there's almost not a single vertical in that country where I can't pick a new digital player that is better at doing that one thing than the big banks are doing at that one thing. And the reason is that the technology now exists and the infrastructure to actually bring down the barriers of entry to those new players. And those are the guys who are actually setting the trend, the businesses that are setting the trend and the new standard in the industry for what customers are going to expect.
Well, I wanted to stay with you a bit because there's a question that came in which is about everyone focuses on customer experience. What about other competitive factors that differentiate between the old and the new banks from each other? And they're looking at who will survive in the next 5 to 10 years. Cohen, what you were talking about is that sort of classic unbundling of financial services and having lots of players do a specific thing very well. There are some people that argue that we might have a rebundling at some point coming over in the next 5 to 10 years. Where do you see is this going? Are we going to continue unbundling and unbundling, or what would really differentiate for the customer the difference between the legacy, the established banks, and some of these fragmented new players?
I think that's such a complex system, Liz, that sort of predicting the outcomes would be absolutely impossible. But what I would say,
Get your
I
crystal
certainly
ball.
think there will be. So I'll give it a go. I think that there are some things that big banks have that continue to be very powerful differentiators for them, and we mustn't underestimate those. I think the two things that always stand out for me is access to capital, and particularly the ability to drive down the cost of capital through deposit holding, and that continues to be strong. And the other aspect is that sort of long dated trust with customers in terms of customers sort of often core services sitting with these old players. And so I think there's going to be a very interesting game being played. And if I had to sort of raise maybe one factor that I think will be a big factor in determining the winners, it's who plays well with others. Because the one thing we're seeing, certainly from our team, and there might be smarter people on this call and at the conference, we simply don't think we can outcompete all the other smart people in the world. And so the way we think about it now is whether you're an old bank, or the traditional bank, a new bank, or you're a specialist fintech player playing in a vertical, doing embedded finance for a specific solution. I think it's about how well you can play with others and how well you can integrate your solution in a flexible way into other people's ecosystems and solutions. And I think the people who do that really well have a really interesting future.
Interesting. So I might want to bring in on this audience question, Sujana from Manzo. I mean, Manzo has a very good reputation for customer service, but at the end of the day, it's a regulated bank, much like Barclays is or Lloyd's. Outside of customer service, how does a newer bank like Manzo kind of differentiate itself from the traditional players?
Well, I think that, we talked about technology, we talked about data and all those
Mhm.
enablers. I think actually, and we talked a little bit about culture, but fundamentally, that's how we're all differentiated. It's not like most of these players, it's not like the changes are hard to spot. It's actually not that hard to see what is obviously right in front of you. I think Cohen talked about the plethora of players out there developing single system solutions. I think that's actually more an indictment of the terrible products and services that have come at these customers over the years. And it's almost like every subcategory of financial services, there's easy pickings about what could be improved and what could be a much better customer proposition. And so there's a lot of specialist players going after each one of them and innovating in that space. I think if you think about the differentiators, look, there's Cohen talked about infrastructure. So of course those like costly legacy systems. I spent 16 years at American Express before I was at Monzo, and I remember being at these conferences with big legacy players and literally having conversations about legacy infrastructure built, with COBOL as the operating language, and having
Yeah.
to hire people from university that didn't learn COBOL anymore and teach them this, ancient language to be able to manage their systems. And, still that culture of working towards the annual release as opposed to kind of the nimble approach that many of these other companies can have. The traditional ways of working, Cohen talked really eloquently about like the inbox. It takes an extraordinary amount of discipline to stay customer centric and customer obsessed with all of that coming at you and be able to manage those guardrails, the silos that exist organizationally in these companies, the need to defensively protect a back book and a P&L, almost at all costs. And then just that, do you have the right talent? Do you have the right mindset and rhythm? I think, Monzo, what we talk about is the fusion of tech and banking is our strength and where the magic comes from. Because it's actually not tech, the technology, it's the best of tech, the ways of working, the purpose driven, the customer centric, the nimble ways of working, the value for invention. And when you add that to banking expertise, you can create something quite extraordinary. It's not easy to do. The roads are littered with incumbents that have spotted the need, put a ton of capital into the need, and just not been able to execute. And so I think it's a lot more deep seated um, than a simple technology moment.
Interesting. I don't know if Diago or Lesley-Anne want to comment a little bit about the sort of how new banks differentiate themselves outside of customer service with the legacy systems.
Yeah, I think the only way to differentiate from others is to understand the customer better than others. Okay, and that goes back to create an obsession with a customer centric approach in terms of technology, culture, teams, and so on. Okay, that's the only way to create different products or products that could differentiate from other banks or from traditional banks. Okay, and I really agree with Cohen in terms of the ecosystem, and I think another massive trend in the future is now, but it will go further in the future. I think is partnerships. Okay, we need to go where the customers are. Okay, so the banks and the financial industry is not a closed ecosystem, it's not a closed industry anymore. So we need to understand where the customer is, how they interact, who they talk to. So if you combine everything together, you can create a strong partnerships with third party, not only with some with some other financial products or institutions, to create relevant products for the customer. So I think this is going to be a massive trend in the financial industry.
Mm. I wanted to stay with you a bit because I wanted to talk a little bit about hyper personalization. And there seems to be many people on the panel are talking about that incumbent banks are kind of hampered from moving forward with improving customer experience just because of the way the infrastructures have set up and some of the technology used. So, what investment in sort of tools, emerging technologies like AI and better data mining, do banks and financial services firms need to do to offer more specific and hyper personal offerings to clients? What do you think, Diego?
Yeah. This is what I call human technology. Okay. So I would say human technology, or anything we need to deliver, not only personalized, but human experience.
Mm.
And that's a key element in the question. So I'm thinking about, for example, journey orchestration and journey measurement. So I think if we can deliver technology that could help us to understand how people interact with us, or how the people interact with others, how we create journeys that could fulfill their needs at any time, with any formats at any channel. I think this is going to be a massive success for the company. Okay. Another one is interactions. So if we are thinking about how people interact with us in multiple channels, we need to understand physical channels, digital channels. So if we can deliver consistent and relevant experiences in all channels, I think it's going to help the business as well. So let me give you an example. So something that we created at Movistar Money is to give back the call center all the information we have about digital behavior. So the call center understand what people are doing in our web, in our app, etc. So anytime they talk to a customer, they can have a richer conversation with the customer, okay, because they understand what they have been doing before with us, or in our ecosystem. So this way to enrich all the interactions we have with our customers, I think is going to be really interesting and really important for the future.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So I want to move on to Cohen for a comment on this. I mean, what are some of the tools that we're seeing that can aid for hyper personalization?
Yeah, I think I'd like to hear the other panelists on this. I think that sometimes bankers in particular go down the road of thinking about personalization as personalizing product. I think what Diego is talking about personalizing journeys is much more uh, at the center of this conversation. So you don't have to have a special product for everyone or a special price for everyone. Most of what we think is interesting as bankers is really not that interesting to customers. What matters to them is if they open their app, that the thing that is at the front is the thing that they're interested in, that sort of
Hmm.
responds to the things that matter to them. And so I think Diego's spot on. I think it's all about the journeys. That's where the action is at. And I think I want to link back, Leslie Ann, to the point you made about the other systems, the supporting infrastructure. We've developed an obsession with observability, and it's simply, can you see what's going on
Yeah.
everywhere in real time? And it sounds like a simple thing. It sounds like we should be able to do that. But I think that observability tools are actually really only now starting to sort of come into their own. And I think that is going to be, if there's one sort of technology area that I would identify as quite an exciting one, it's observability together with AI and what that can do to help us shape these journeys. I'll make one more comment about the technology we need. And I would say that for most of us, for 95% of what we do, we should not build it, we should not buy it, we should rent it. Um, I think the best tools out there are often open source tools, they are often the tools off the shelf. And because these tools speak to each other so much more easily, I've become very skeptical of any technology manager that comes to me with a big number to say we have to buy technology to find our way out of a problem.
Interesting. And I really liked what you said earlier about personalizing that customer journey instead of personalizing the product. And yeah, of course, we all know the open source revolution is eking into the financial services industry and banks more and more every day. I wanted to turn to Leslie Ann a bit because it was interesting when you talked about with M-Pesa that the people on the ground didn't trust banks, but they trusted the telecoms firm, for example. In terms of offering these hyper personalized services, is this going away to rebuilding trust in the financial services ecosystem for a lot of customers? What do you think?
Well, I think we created a way for people to have confidence to try, and it was robust, and it worked, and it was real time, and it was modeling cash more than it was modeling a bank account. So people were very familiar with cash, and the fact that a real time payment lands in your balance, you can spend it right away. I can tell you stories of people who went along to the agent store, saw their balance, withdrew their whole balance, counted the cash, and deposited it again. And that created trust that this thing is real and they're not a fraud. And it takes something like 7 interactions before people truly trust, and you can lose it in one. So when I work with innovation projects and fintechs, I help projects think about service design, because the moment you lose trust from the customer, it's gone for a long time, and it takes a long time to build. And so, like, fundamentally, getting the foundations right is at the center of this hyper personalization conversation. And actually, for us, when we were doing hyper personalization, it was more like the way that Ken and Sujata were talking, where even in your Nokia 1100, you can do this. We wouldn't show customers products that they hadn't actually signed up for. We wouldn't show them menus that didn't make sense. We kept the interface as simple as it needed to be for the customer where they were in their journey. When they chose, for example, to sign up for digital credit or for digital savings, then they saw these offers, but they didn't see them till they had realized what it was, why they wanted it, and been on that journey. And a lot of the banking offerings out there was like, how many menus can we show on customers, show how much we offer them, when really that's not the right place to start for where your customers are. So you can apply this hyper personalization right down to the financial inclusion sector, very, very much so. And we also used it heavily in the control space, because we could see people were jumping out of menus. We saw failed transactions. We saw things going wrong. If you don't use that data effectively, as well as the positive cases, then you actually end up with a service that is less good than it can be. And so we would use that quite a lot, for example, to understand why are reversals happening, why are people needing so many PIN changes, why this, why that. And we would actually then run our innovation programs based on learning from those data points. And so I think it's a really important conversation, and customer centricity at the center of it. But yes, the trust comes by having a huge dollop of empathy along the way for your customers, and the fact that you've got to be with them on the journey where they are. If they're a high-end customer and they want a smartphone app that just works, give them that. If they're not, what do you need to give them? And
I
you can
wanted
run
to,
both in the same
yeah,
system.
go. I wanted to stay with you because I had a bonus question that I think you'll be okay with, and kind of looking into some of your consulting work that you've worked with. In terms of hyper personalization and having a lot more data on a customer to offer them unique journeys, how much of the industry kind of looks at that as not a way to better serve the customer, but to sell more stuff, to derive more revenue from that customer?
I think
What is the balance with that attitude?
it it depends on the business model, really, right? I mean, certainly in the mobile money space, the data is private and it's not sold in that way at all. Our first service where we used data that was the customers with the customer's consent was Mshwari back in 2012, where an alternate data score was used based on how many people they called, how much money they topped up on airtime, how much they used their M-Pesa account. It was an index that was used with the customer's consent when they wanted to access digital credit and savings, and with the bank, a loans and savings marketplace, if you like. And we had data privacy as a pillar of the whole service from the outset. So we absolutely did not get involved. But our business model was based on fees for services at that point in time. Now you get into the fintech model where everything's free. There has to be a revenue model, and that's where some of the conversations in the industry come from. And I think it comes down to everyone thinking very carefully about their business model. There's been research in Kenya amongst financial inclusion customers done by CGAP, the Consultative Group Assisting the Poor, which actually showed that customers will buy a product and pay more for a product if their privacy is protected, even in the financial inclusion sector. And so I think that we shouldn't assume that free-for-all data is the right way to go on this story, and it has to be the customer's data that's with the customer's consent. So I'm loving seeing some of the products that are coming out in the financial inclusion space as well. There's companies that are really saying, how do we put customers in charge of their data and provide it in that kind of secure and safe way where they want to use it? It's really heartening to see the change in perspective on this across the industry.
Excellent. So we've got about 10 minutes left, in a little under 10 minutes left in our discussion, and I wanted to give kind of a final question for each of you. I wanted to have you describe what a true customer-centric bank looks like, and what it delivers today. So I'll start with Sujana. What would that true customer-centric bank look like?
I think maybe I'll just bring it to life with an example. So we recently launched a product called Manzo Flex, and we internally call it like the best way to pay later because it's sort of in that category of loans. And if I just kind of describe the way that came to life, we brought, first of all, the right fusion of tech and banking together. So the best lending experts, the best designers, the best engineers, the best data scientists, the best user researchers, and really put them in a room, and said, you're unshackled, like understand, look at this industry, talk to customers, understand what are the real pain points that are not being met across the industry, and what could we actually do that would meet that need. And, they talked to a lot of customers, they looked at all the competitive research, looked at every potential product out there, and they came back with a whole list of propositions. The first thing they heard from customers was their customers want certainty. They want, when they get to check out, an approved limit and an understanding of how much they're going to be able to borrow, and then the opportunity to spread that cost when they make a purchase. They want to have control. So instead of the credit card world where you have, no particular end date, really a fixed repayment plan and understanding of how long you're borrowing for and when that end date is, and, potentially no penalties for paying that back earlier, having flexibility there. They wanted to have visibility. So if customers used a whole bunch of different buy now, pay later options, they were shopping around between different apps to keep track of their borrowing and looking at different repayment dates and where those were all sitting. And then they wanted convenience. So the ability to really shop anywhere, not just to buy the AirPods, but potentially fund, the vet bill that came that was unexpected, or, in my case this morning in the rain in London, the plumber that had to arrive and potentially requires a little bit of extra financing. And so you take all that insight and they brought it together and they developed what we thought was really a game-changing product. So it took the best of what was out there and then innovated on top of that. We give customers a limit rather than asking them to, apply for the credit at checkout. They know how much they're underwritten for. You can choose a different repayment plan for every transaction. That's where the control comes in. You can pay early. You have a fixed set of repayment plans. You can see all of that from a visibility perspective in your Manzo app alongside all of your existing finances and feel like you have an understanding of your whole financial life. And then you can use it wherever you can use Manzo, with the vet, with the dentist, and for your AirPods. And then you marry that with core values that that you're about affordability and responsibility for your customers, and you make sure that you're doing affordability checks and you are marrying that through the credit reports all the way through as a regulated company, and you communicate that all super clearly to a customer. And I think when you do all of that, I'm just giving it in that one example, but when you do all of that, you create things that delight customers, you do it in the right way, and you can feel really confident that you're being responsible. And then customers will come. I mean, I'm not allowed to talk about the waiting list, but it's amazing. And we've blown away our targets because they know that this thing is with somebody that they can trust, that have their best interests at heart and are built for their needs. And I think that's what a customer-centric company does.
Interesting. So I'll move on to Cohen now to give us your best description of a customer centric bank.
Liz, I was so impressed with Sujata's answer and listening to it that I forgot that I
Monzo
had to
then.
think about what I'm going to say next.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one to go after. Um, but maybe two thoughts. Maybe the yin and yang of it at the two ends of the spectrum. I think, I always remind myself that people who we think of now as, being old school, at some point thought that what they were doing was cutting edge. And I think that we only beginning to imagine what true customer centricity looks like. What is being opened up by the new infrastructure, the new technologies will go even beyond what we imagine today. So I think the first thing I would say is I think when it comes to answering this question, a big dose of humility will be required to really see the possibilities will be beyond where we are today in this journey. I think that's the one sort of side of it. The other side of it is, I think it comes back to really internalizing the fact that what we have here is a relationship. It's a two-way relationship, which is ultimately between humans. It's between us as teams managing businesses, trying to serve our customers, trying to do something meaningful and transformative in the lives of our customers. And customers who want to be heard by us, who don't just want to listen to what we tell them, but want to be heard. And I think taking the relationship seriously, the trust seriously, and allowing it to weigh heavily on our shoulders, and 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 reminding us of this thing at the center of it all, which is compassion. Um, that is the heart of a successful relationship, and that will not change. A lot else will change, but I think that will not change. And I was delighted to hear all the participants emphasizing this
Yeah, I
relationship
was about to
piece, the
say
human
I
piece of
doubt
it.
anyone from the panel will disagree with you with what you just said. But I want to give Leslie Ann a last thought as well about how she would describe would see a customer centric bank.
So yes and on everything I heard. I'd say yes and stay curious. If you're not at the front line with customers and you're hearing things, stay curious about what they're saying. Because actually it's the frontline staff, the folk who are with customers and customer care centers and who are talking that really kind of can come up with some absolute gems about what's really going on. And
Mhm.
the moment you lose that curiosity about what actually is going on, the bank stops being customer centric.
Interesting. And Diego, you get our final comment as we come count down a few minutes on what you would consider a customer centric bank.
Yeah, I think customer centric is about delivering value, and the only way to deliver value is transparency, is active listening, is adaptation, and other elements. For example, risk models. I think it's a good example. Risk models or traditional risk models, I think, are broken. I think they are not. I think they are not fair, especially in some countries where data is quite limited. Okay, so the only way to deliver value to the clients, to the customers, to find new ways to create accurate, fair models based on the real behavior, based on the holistic view of the client's life and reality. So, and goes back to data in some ways. And the other one is culture. Is create a culture based on the customer and based on value. For example, in my teams, we all share the same objectives. The IT department, they don't have objectives about implementing this technology or designing this API. No, we all have business and customers objectives. And I think that's key because we keep us focused on what really matters.
That's interesting. I think what I'll take away from this, I know we talked about old Nokia phones and data and different technologies, but it really comes down to human relationships and not only the internal culture of the organization, but sitting down and listening to the customer base as well. So I wanted to thank you all for a very interesting discussion. We'll leave this here and thank you very much.